Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and yes, I am wearing the same shit and the same jewelry and the same makeup as in my last video. I don't have time to film on the weekend, so I'm currently batch filming a little bit. But anyway, today's video is going to be a book tag, and that book tag is the Contradictions book tag that I was tagged in a while ago by Clio from Bemused Bookworm, and the original creator of the tag is Daniela from Only for a Page. And of course I will leave both their videos as well as their channels linked down below, so definitely go and check them out. Now, the Contradictions book tag seems like a quite easy tag. I don't think I have to explain anything because it's gonna become very apparent what this tag is about once I start reading the questions. And there's 9 questions, so let's get right into it. The first question is, I love this genre, but I didn't like this book. And to be honest, quite an easy answer, because there's currently only 2 books on my shelves from my favorite genre that I absolutely didn't like. And my favorite genre, of course, is adult high fantasy, and the book that I went with, to nobody's surprise, this will come to absolutely nobody's surprise, I guarantee it, is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynn, which is the worst book I read this year, or the book that I least liked this year. I have a whole review on why I didn't like it, linked down below. Basically, my very summarized thoughts is, first of all, I found the story boring as fuck. I found the characters to be all the same character, basically. I thought there was way too much action. I don't typically like action scenes, and this book lived from unnecessary action scenes. Like, for me, action scenes are something I only want if it tells me something about the characters, or if it tells me something about a relationship between characters, or if it's really, really integral to the plot. Otherwise, just please leave the action scenes out. Wasn't the case here. So yeah, I just already found this book mediocre as fuck, very boring as fuck. I had nothing that grabbed my interest within this book. And then on top of that, which funnily is the stuff that everyone, you know, chumps on in my review, even though I only mentioned it after I mentioned all my other problems with the book. My other issue is, if I already don't like a book, and then on top of that it doesn't have diversity, I'm just like, you know, you're a bad book. It's like, diversity is one of those fun things where I won't like a book or dislike a book because it has or doesn't have diversity. But if I love a book already and if it also has diversity, I'm like, this is the best book ever. And if I already don't like a book and then on top of that it also doesn't have diversity, I'm like, yeah, you're a really bad book, in my opinion. So yeah. Anyway, this was a well-loved book this year within the adult high fantasy genre, but it just really didn't do it for me. Question number 2 is, I rarely read this genre, but I love this book. And to be honest, there's a lot of genres I don't often read. But then I also, when I pick up books from those genres, I don't love the book. And then there's pretty much 3 main genres that I read, and those are high fantasy, or anything with fantasy, literary fiction, and classics. So I didn't really want to pick any books out of those genres or that could in any way fall into those genres. So I only really have one book that I could pick from a genre outside of those that's still on my shelves, and that is Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey Mcquisten. I'm not sure if I would say I loved this book. I mean, I did really love it when I first read it, but you know, now that it's been a while, I'm not sure if I would necessarily say this. But this was just one of those books. It's a contemporary, new adult YA kind of romance, or older side of YA, very much older side of YA romance. And I don't read romance, but I read this and it reads like really fanfiction-y, and I don't mean fanfiction as in it reads badly written, but you know, it gave me those kind of very just fluffy, surface level feelings that I usually only get for fanfiction. That's mostly what I mean. And so would I reread this book? No. So it's like not a book that I would count anywhere among my favorites ever, but it's just a very, very fun and light-hearted read. And for someone who doesn't read romance, I was quite surprised by how much I enjoyed this when I read it. Question number 3 is probably the question that gave me the most difficulty, and that is, I love this trope, but I didn't like this book. And honestly, as I said, I regularly unhaul books from my shelves, so it's quite hard to think of which books had tropes that I liked that I didn't love, because I pretty much instantly forget about those books. But the book that I ended up choosing is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, which, for those of you who have been on my channel for a while, you will know that I hated the first 2 Poppy War books. I really enjoyed the last one. And the trope I chose is the kind of school enemies, rivals to allies trope, which there is a little bit of that within the story, but it's not focused on in any way, so I don't think, even if I thought the trope was better done, which, to be honest, I don't particularly like how it's executed within the story. I don't think I would have loved the book anymore. So yeah, it's just, I went with the Poppy War and with that trope. So it's the only thing I was able to find, to be honest. Question number 4 is of course the opposite. I hate this trope, but I love this book. And this one by far was the easiest to choose out of all the questions, which is kind of funny. And the trope I'm going with is the trope that I have quite often cited as my most hated trope of all time. And that is the resurrection trope. The reason why I don't like the resurrection trope is because for me it makes stakes null and void, because any character can come back at any time. And there's like, I don't think there has been any instance where I thought the resurrection trope was well done. There were instances where I didn't mind because a character came back that I loved a lot, and so I was like, yeah, I really hate this trope, but also I am happy this happened because you gave me back my baby. But, you know, the trope as a trope, I never liked in any book that I read, with the exception for this one. And that is the A Chorus of Dragons series by Jen Lyons. I only have the second book here, which is The Name of All Things. The first book is The Ruin of Kings. And, wow, that rhymed. The reason why I love the resurrection trope in this series, I'm not even sure if I can say it. For some reason with this series specifically, it doesn't feel like a spoiler to me. Usually when I say a book has a resurrection trope, it feels like a spoiler to me because, you know, it makes you aware that there's characters that died and are resurrected. But the reason why it doesn't feel like a spoiler for me with this series is because resurrection as well as reincarnation are literally part of the world building. Because one of the main side characters is the literal goddess of death, who you can go to petition for family members and loved ones to be resurrected. And so, yeah, that is part of the world building. Resurrection kind of is part of the world building. It does mean that some of the death scenes within the series kind of lose their stakes because you kind of already assume that a character is gonna come back. But there's also other death scenes where it still hits very hard emotionally. So I just think the way Jen Lyons dealt with the resurrection trope is beautifully done within this series, and I love it a lot. Question number 5. I love this author, but I didn't like this book. And once again, I don't think I can really say I didn't love this book. I just didn't enjoy it as much as I hoped I would enjoy it. But the book that I'm talking about is quite a recent read, and that is Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson, which is the 3rd book in the Skyward series. And I just thought this installment was very disappointment, mostly a rehashing of the story beats we already know from earlier stories. There was hardly any new information that we got. It felt absolutely unnecessary, the entirety of the book. Like, the necessary information and plot beats were like 5% of the entire book, in my opinion. And yeah, I didn't like it. I mean, I did like it. I enjoyed my reading experience of it because I like Spencer. But for a Brandon Sanderson novel, I could almost say I hated it. Like, for a Brandon Sanderson novel, as much as I can hate a Brandon Sanderson novel, like, this is the lowest of the low. This is probably, well, White Sand is even lower, but you know, actually I could probably have taken White Sand to answer for this question as well. But in terms of Brandon Sanderson novels, I think this is the one that I enjoyed the least that I have read. Question number 6 is, I previously disliked a book by this author, but I loved this book. And to be honest, I had a really hard time with this one because the only one I can think of, as I said, is, I have it right here, is the 3rd book in the Poppy War series, which I enjoyed after having really disliked the first 2 books. But I decided to cheat a little bit to go with another option to not have the Poppy War twice in this video. And technically, as I said, it's cheating because the first book I read by this author is the one that I love the most, so I can't really say I previously read a book I didn't like by this author, but I'm sure I will read more books by this author and love those books, so you know, whatever. I read a book I didn't like by this author and keep on reading books by that author. And that is Silvia Moreno Garcia. The book that I love the most is Gods of Jade and Shadow, which is a Mayan mythology inspired historical fantasy. And the book that I didn't like, wait a second, I have it down here, was Mexican Gothic. And this was Gothic historical horror. So yeah. That's the answer I'm going with for this question. Question number 7 is, I love this cover, but I don't like this book. And for that, I went with Descendant of the Crane by Joanne Hay. I mean, just look at this cover. This cover is the only reason why this book is still on my shelves, because I mostly found it very, very boring and very, very average, and just there was nothing in this story that grabbed me. I gotta be honest, I also don't remember anything from the story. That's how forgettable it was. But the cover is just way too gorgeous to get rid of it, so it's just gonna stay on my shelves. And the last one is, I don't like this cover, but I love this book. And this goes for all of Anne Bishop's covers, because whoever designs her covers, nothing against them, but they do not manage to capture the essence of what is in the stories, and most of them just look like bad fantasy romances. Not that fantasy romance is a bad genre, but you know, looks like bad covers from fantasy romance. And some of Anne Bishop's books do go in the direction of fantasy romance, but it's not what her books are about at their essence. Not that it would be bad if it was, but you know, it's kind of like expectations and then what you get inside, that type of deal. So yeah, I just, even if it was fantasy romance that was in her books, I still think the covers are ugly as fuck, because I don't know, does this cover make you want to read this book? It doesn't to me. Like, I hate her covers so much. So anyway, that was it for all the questions. The last one is just to tag people, and as always, I will just tag people on Twitter because I'm too lazy to think about who to tag before I sit down to film the video. And yeah, any thoughts you have to any of my answers to any of the books that I mentioned, leave them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out. And with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!